The neon lights of New York City flickered like 1,000 stars in a sky that never darkened. Gideon Caldwell, a self-made billionaire with a net worth in the billions, leaned back in his penthouse office, gazing at the city skyline. The deal he had just secured was worth over $1 billion, another notch on his belt, another victory to add to his growing empire. Yet, for reasons he couldn't understand, a strange emptiness gnawed at him. His assistant Bryn walked in, with a confident smile, holding a stack of papers. "Mr. Caldwell, your flight to Tennessee is ready. Shall I prepare the jet?" Gideon didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared out the window, watching the lights of the city reflect off the glass. Then he made a decision. "Cancel the flight," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar resolve. "I'm staying a bit longer." Bryn raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Sir, the meeting in Tennessee is critical. I'll handle it from here." "Change of plans," Gideon replied, his mind already set on the next step. His driver, Elton, arrived shortly after, and Gideon climbed into the black luxury car. As the vehicle drove away from the city, Gideon's thoughts drifted to a place he had been trying to forget: the past. The town of Nashville, Tennessee, where it all began. He hadn't been back in over a decade. The place where he was once just a boy with big dreams, a place that felt like both home and a prison. The car rolled through the familiar streets, past the places that had once defined his youth, the library where he spent hours reading business magazines he couldn't afford, the street corner where he hustled selling newspapers just to make ends meet. And then, as the car neared the end of the street, his heart skipped a beat. Maggie's Diner. It looked the same. Time had not touched it despite the years that had passed. The neon sign still flickered weakly, and the same worn-out red booth sat inside. Gideon's breath caught in his throat. This was the place where he had made a promise to himself as a teenager. "I'll never come back until I have everything." But now here he was. "Elton, stop here," Gideon ordered, his voice distant, almost as if he were talking to someone else. "I'll be a minute." The door jingled as Gideon entered the diner, and the familiar scent of coffee and grilled food hit him instantly. The atmosphere hadn't changed. Cozy, old-fashioned, and timeless. He took a seat at the corner booth, the very one where he had spent countless nights dreaming of a life he could never afford. As he stared out the window, memories flooded back. His dreams of escaping this small town, the weight of his family's struggles, the desire to prove he was meant for something more. His thoughts were interrupted when a soft voice broke the silence. "What can I get you, sir?" Gideon looked up, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. The waitress before him had dark brown hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing a simple uniform that was no different from the one he had seen countless times growing up. But there was something about her, something too familiar. It was Tessa Harrove, the same Tessa who had been the brightest, most ambitious girl in school, the one who had always dreamed of something bigger, better than this small town. But now, she looked different, worn, tired. Her once vibrant green eyes had lost their fire. "Steak and coffee," Gideon said, his voice betraying the shock he felt. She scribbled down the order and walked away, and Gideon couldn't help but watch her. He hadn't seen Tessa in over 10 years. Back then, they'd been friends. No, more than friends. They had shared dreams, plans, hopes for the future. But somewhere along the way, their paths had diverged. When Tessa returned with his meal, Gideon didn't wait. "Tessa." She froze, her eyes scanning his face with confusion. "How do you know my name?" Gideon leaned forward, a sense of familiarity making his heart race. "Westwood High, class of 2012. Recognition flashed in her eyes. Her hand trembled slightly as she set down the plate. "Gideon," she whispered. "Gideon Caldwell." He smiled. But it wasn't the confident smile of the billionaire he had become. It was the smile of a boy who had never forgotten her. "The one and only," he said softly. Tessa blinked, her gaze shifting from shock to something more complicated. "You're the Gideon Caldwell? The billionaire?" Gideon nodded, but the pride he should have felt was absent. Instead, an unexpected ache settled in his chest. "I never thought I'd see you again," Tessa said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "You made it out. I always knew you would." Gideon's gaze softened. "I didn't expect you to be here." She shrugged, her smile hollow. "Well, some of us don't get second chances, do we?" They talked for hours, but as the conversation shifted, Tessa's demeanor changed. She became quieter, more guarded. Gideon could sense that something was wrong, something she wasn't saying. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. "Tessa, what happened to you? You were going to change the world." She hesitated. Then, with a heavy sigh, she shared the painful truth. "My father passed away when I was in my second year at Harvard," Tessa said, her voice shaky. "After that, things fell apart. My mother got sick, and I had to drop out to take care of her. My little brother was still in school, and I had to provide for them. So I took any job I could find. And now, I'm here, working at Maggie's diner." Gideon's chest tightened. He hadn't known. The girl he had once admired, the one who had been so full of life and potential, had been living a life full of pain and sacrifice. The girl who had always had the world at her feet was now struggling to survive. "And you're still here," Gideon said, his voice quiet. "Yeah," Tessa said with a bitter laugh. "Some dreams just aren't meant to come true." The next day, Gideon couldn't stop thinking about Tessa. He was a billionaire, someone who could make anything happen. But he couldn't make her life better, or could he? He decided to make an offer, a way to give her a second chance, just like he had been given. But he didn't want to do it the easy way. He didn't want to simply throw money at the problem. He wanted to give her a real chance to change her life. 2 days later, Tessa found a black envelope under the windshield wiper of her car. The elegant gold ink on the front read, "Meet me at 9 a.m., Caldwell Enterprises." Her heart raced as she opened the letter. She didn't know what to expect, but curiosity got the better of her. When Tessa walked into Gideon's office, she was stunned by the view. The office was sleek, modern, and filled with luxury. The last time she had been in a place like this, it had been a dream. Gideon was sitting behind a massive desk, but he stood when she entered, his gaze softening when he saw her. "Tessa," he said, his voice steady but kind, "I want to offer you a position at my company." Tessa's heart skipped a beat. "A job?" "Not just any job," Gideon said, sliding a contract across the desk. "A managerial position, 6 figures, full benefits, and I'll cover your mother's medical bills, your brother's education, whatever you need." Tessa couldn't believe her ears. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking. Gideon looked at her, his expression serious. "Because you deserve a second chance. You were always meant for more than this." Tears welled up in Tessa's eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt hope. But just as Tessa began to find her footing, a new challenge emerged. Gideon's business rival, a ruthless tycoon named Vance Warwick, had gotten wind of Gideon's involvement in Tessa's life. Vance wasn't just after Gideon's company. He was after Tessa too. He made her an offer that was impossible to ignore. Money, fame, power, everything Tessa had ever dreamed of, but at a cost. To take it, she would have to betray Gideon. Conflicted, Tessa found herself torn between loyalty and ambition. The future she had worked so hard to build with Gideon was now in jeopardy. Days passed, and the weight of the decision grew heavier on Tessa's shoulders. Vance Warwick's offer loomed over her like a shadow, tempting her with the promises, of wealth and power. She could feel the pull of everything she had dreamed of, the lifestyle, the recognition, the freedom from the struggles that had defined her life. But deep down, she knew it came at a cost. Gideon had given her something no amount of money could buy. A second chance, a chance to rebuild not only her life but also her sense of self-worth. The thought of betraying that trust, of abandoning the man who had stood by her, made her sick to her stomach. One night, as she sat in her modest apartment, looking out at the city skyline from her small window, she replayed her conversation with Gideon in her mind, the way he had offered her the job not out of pity, but because he believed in her. The kindness in his eyes when he had promised to take care of her family. No one had ever treated her like that before. But now, faced with Vance's lavish offer, she was tempted to take the easy route. She could have everything she ever wanted, instantly. All she had to do was say yes. The next morning, Tessa walked into Caldwell Enterprises, her footsteps echoing in the silent hallways as she made her way toward Gideon's office. Her heart raced with every step. Torn between the world she knew and the world that awaited her, she couldn't bring herself to meet Gideon's eyes, knowing the truth she was hiding. Gideon stood up as she entered, his expression unreadable. He knew something was wrong. There was a tension in the air that neither of them could ignore. "Tessa, I've been thinking," Gideon began, his voice calm, but filled with something deeper. "You've got the position here if you want it. But more than that, you've got a future here. I'm not offering you a job because you need saving. I'm offering you a chance to build something real with someone who believes in you." She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She had to tell him, but could she, really? The weight of her secret felt like 1,000 bricks pressing on her chest. "I know you've been given an offer, Tessa," Gideon continued, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Vance Warwick isn't just offering you money. He's offering you a life of luxury, one that might be hard to turn down. But let me ask you this. What does that life really cost?" The question cut through her like a knife. Tessa felt exposed, like Gideon could see through every hesitation. It was as though he had known all along. And now, it was time for her to make a choice. "I can't tell you what to do, Tessa," Gideon said quietly. "But I can tell you that the person you are, the person I see in you, is more valuable than anything that man can give you. And I won't hold it against you if you choose differently. But whatever you decide, know that you always have a place here, with me." The silence between them stretched for what felt like an eternity. And then, finally, Tessa made up her mind. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I won't take his offer." Gideon's eyes softened, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You've made the right choice," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. Tessa felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the burden of her indecision finally slipping away. She wasn't just choosing between two men, two offers, or two paths. She was choosing herself. The woman who had worked so hard to build a life, who had fought for every ounce of happiness she had. She was now choosing a future based on her own terms. And with that, Tessa took her seat at the desk across from Gideon, ready to embrace the life she had fought so hard for. Knowing that it wasn't the easy road that would bring her fulfillment, it was the road that was true to who she was. As she looked up at Gideon, she saw something more than just a business partner. She saw a friend, a mentor, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something more. Together, they would face whatever challenges the future held. Because for the first time in her life, Tessa knew she wasn't alone anymore. And in that moment, the future didn't seem so uncertain. It felt like a new beginning.